Hey, Schmer. I'm sure you can recognize where this is. This is home. Baby boy, look at the camera. No, look at the look at the camera. You. Anyway, I am definitely having a fun time using my break studying film history because I have a midterm the day I come back, and I'm taking it slow, and I'm not letting it stress myself out, but it's something I have to do. So it's been a while since I've done this, and I think for today's video, I'm going to run over some film and music history of the 60s and the 70s. Now, as you know, a major part of the 60s was counterculture, in which we kind of know as like the hippie generation. It's about people that are kind of opposed to having the same ideals as their parents, opposed to going off and fighting in wars, that general thing. Now, this partially led to the emergence of both folk music and rock and roll. Now, you know a lot of the stuff involved in folk music and rock and roll. There was the British Invasion, which had the Beatles. There are just general folk rockish people like Simon and Garfunkel. And this kind of all culminated into Woodstock at the end of the 60s. That kind of marked the end of what is traditionally known as counterculture. However, one thing I find pretty interesting about music during this time period is that the idea of the concept album was born. Now, you probably think of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. There are other ones that could be called the first concept album, like Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues. I like the Moody Blues. We've talked about them a little bit, but you probably don't remember them. Now, during the 60s, films began failing. Some of them were huge flops, such as Cleopatra and Dr. Dolittle, which you may have seen a remake of. However, after these more traditional Hollywood films started to fail, the film industry kind of turned more towards independence because the production code had ended. Now, the production code had said what could be in movies, and they had gotten basically rid of it at this point in time because it was found to be too restrictive. So now more edgy films were kind of being produced, for lack of a better word, and introduced, instead of saying these films were approved or not approved, it introduced the rating system. Now, fun fact, we know the rating system, like PG, PG-13, R, but at this point in time, instead of NC-17, it was X. So movies that were illicit had the X rating. And this is what leads porn to use like XXXX stuff because that is used to say, oh, look at how great this film is. It's so restricted. XXXX. Like, this is so inappropriate. We needed this many X's. And that is why porn does that. Fun fact. Meanwhile, the 60s kind of reflected the 50s culture with things like the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres. It was very much 50s culture and kind of like simple and just the general American household. There were some more progressive things like Bewitched, which was about a witch living with her mortal husband, and she kind of had power over him because she was a witch. And the series was kind of about his struggle to live with a wife who had more power than him. So it was an interesting idea. Also, in the 60s, PBS was formed, which was the first kind of non-profit TV network, and NPR is their radio counterpart, and they made Sesame Street. Then during the 70s, counterculture began to fail, as I'm sure you're aware of, and things turned more generally to pessimism, and the media turned inward. It was known as the me generation because people would make films that were all about themselves, and some viewed this as very selfish. I'm sure you know that John Lennon was very critical of this. Now, in music, there's some new genres that were formed were glam rock, which is very theatric, disco, punk rock. None of these we really covered extensively in class, but just so you know. Now, at this point in time, older generations turned to TV while younger generations turned to film. Things like the Watergate scandal in particular made people have like less trust in things like television. Because at this point, television was finally starting to become good at like covering news and doing things like filming the debates. But younger audience turned to films because they didn't want to trust, the man as much. Now, at this point, auteur films also started to catch on. Auteur films are kind of the idea that the director is what makes the film, and the most important thing in a film is the director. But this is kind of taken to an artsy, pretentious level that's hard to understand. I don't even fully understand it myself, to be honest. Basically, it's the idea that the director is the most important and that everything else is kind of inconsequential. And, this is kind of what we see today because, you don't really remember the writer of the film, you don't remember the editor, you remember the director, besides the actors, of course. Some examples being Annie Hall or The Godfather. However, the auteur movement died pretty quickly to make room for the blockbuster. The first blockbuster film was Jaws. It set up what a blockbuster is. There were some that kind of preceded it, but Jaws was definitely the biggest one and the one that made it a trend. directed by Steven Spielberg. It was a huge hit in the summer, and that set up a precedent, which was followed by Star Wars, Rocky, Rambo. This is also when prepackaged sequels became a thing, where like a movie franchise would have a huge amount of sequels, and they would have somewhat similar plots, but there would just be like a huge line of them. Now, this had existed before this. I mean, Charlie Chan is another example of a series that has like a ton of sequels, but this is when this kind of became the norm and audiences like expected this to come. Additionally, the late 70s is when television started to cover more social issues, such as All in the Family and its many, many spin off shows, which covered issues such as racism, sexism, the role of the nuclear family, and that's where we finished off in my class. As you could see, I'm trying to study, and I'm making a video because I'm trying to become a little better at that because I've been slacking off lately. I hope you are having a good time in school, Shemara. I'm enjoying my break, and I miss you a lot.